Hey, it's John and Mike, brew-dudes.com, and we've got a nice little light-colored beer in front of us this week, and this is a style that my friend Mike is well known for. There is a lot of suggested searches around brew dudes for this particular beer, or at least this style, and this style would be cream ale. And we love this style because, as you know, young home brewers back in the day, when you wanted something light and tasted more like your macro brewery lagers, this was something you could make at room temperatures and still get close to the style, as did the breweries of old when they were trying to compete using their own equipment with the big lager breweries from the Midwest of America. So with that, I'll let Mike talk more about the recipe and what he did to brew up this American classic.
Yeah, so it's no secret I love this style. I haven't brewed one in a while, or at least not as true to form as longtime watchers would know. But this recipe, let me just run through the recipe real quick. So this is 5 pounds or 2.2 kilograms of pale malt, raw pale malt. Then it's also 5 pounds, 2.2 kilograms of American Pilsner malt.
Pilsner malt.
Right? So a 50-50 blend of just 2-row, I hate using that word, pale malt and Pilsner malt. And then this one actually, because I wanted to use the whole bag instead of, I used 2 pounds or 907 grams of flaked corn, maize.
Yes.
Right?
Maize.
I think a lot of homebrew shops sell it as maize because they want to be fancy. So it's flaked corn.
I think corn has a different definition in different parts of the world. Yes.
It does.
Continue.
But so anyway, so 2 pounds of flaked corn, which sometimes for me might be a little bit much, but we'll see what you think. And then I went classic. This is the way, for me, this is the way you do it. It's 1 ounce or 28 grams of Liberty at 60 minutes. And then it's 2 ounces or 56 grams rather, of Liberty with 15 minutes. So I'm not shooting for like a lot of that aroma to come through, but you want to try to strike a balance between some Liberty flavor, some of that earthy herbal spiciness, and still have a little bit of that in the aroma. And we'll talk about the yeast in a minute. This is, so I mashed this at 154. Actually, this one was an overnight mash. You were here that night for that. So this was an overnight mash, meaning I set the mash up to mash at my target temperature of 154, and I put it in the orange cooler, and I covered the top of it, and once it was mashed in, doughed in, I just left it. And I left it overnight for, so let's say 15 hours. Then I come back the next day and bring it up to temp with some boiling water, run it off, sparge, start the boil just like normal. But anyway, it's an overnight mash. So I did that because I was also brewing another beer at the same time, and I didn't want to try to do 2 mashes at once. So the overnight mash works. And for a beer like this where you want it to be light and you want it to be as attenuated as you can, an overnight mash can help you with that. This beer, water chemistry, it's from a sulfite chloride ratio, it's 0.5 sulfite to chloride. Or for those of you who are mathematically prowess, it's a 2-to-1 chloride to sulfite ratio. A little bit of lactic acid just to get the pH targeted right. I'm not measuring it, it's just a calculation. So that being said, this was 5.5 gallons in the fermenter. The starting gravity was actually 1057, which is significantly higher than probably what I usually shoot for. Yep. But I think that's the overnight mash coming into place as being really well converted. And then the final gravity was 1006 for an ABV of 6.8, which is a little bit heavy for this beer, for what I want this beer to be, which is a drinker. But it's, but whatever, you can't win them all, and I'll take it. I'll take 6.8 ABV.
I guess I just will drink one tonight.
Yeah, go easy, man. Don't go too fast. So there we go. So there's the beer. So what do you think? What are you getting for the...
What was the yeast strain again?
Tell me what you think about the beer first.
Oh, come on, man. Well, it's great. This has more lager characteristics than other cream ales you've brewed, and that's why I was interested to hear about the lager or the strain you used, the actual yeast strain you used, because that's like it is very lagery in its presentation to me, and its finish. The hops presentation in a lager is like very just, you know, the Liberty doesn't have some of the fruitiness that shows up in the ale versions of this. It's very nice, just a nice herbal, peppery kind of taste on the back end of the flavor, and the corn doesn't come through too much. I can detect it a little bit on the aroma.
I think there's a sweetness in the initial sip, and then you're left with for me, the initial sip. There's a sweetness of it's mild. The corn part is mild, but I think from you know, having drank a lot of just all Pilsner beer, right? The corn, there's just a hint of a sweetness there that goes well with the Pilsner malt, but then it yields itself to I think that 15-minute and the 60-minute, but the bittering. So this is only 14 IBUs at 60 minutes, right? And then there's another, if you believe this, but it's there's another 7 IBUs coming from the 15-minute edition. So altogether, it's only like a 20+ IBU beer, which is, you know, for the style.
I think the water chemistry, your hops choices, and the yeast strain is what's making this beer what it is. And I think those are the big 3 things that I feel are like making this beer what it is. So tell me what the yeast strain is.
Abiales. No, I'm saying
you got me.
It's the Fermentis Saflager S189.
Oh,
so the yellow package, not the 3470, which is the Weihenstephaner strain, which I've used when we did the warm ferment videos. So this is, I wanted to try this yeast out, and I fermented this actually at 65 degrees. Because that was like the temperature was at the basement was at a good temperature to just sort of like hold that and not get too cool and not get too warm. So I fermented this at a slightly, you know, for lager yeast, I guess you'd call that warm, but 65 it works here. I will say that I felt like it was a little bit stalled out. So it was at like 10-14 when I was ready to pull it after about 10 days, but it was. To me, I knew 10-14 was just high, so I threw the heat belt on it, and there's a little bit of a weird taste, and I wasn't sure if like this lager yeast at 65 was a bad idea at that point. So I threw the heat belt on it, which allowed it to get up to about 72, and then it fermented from 10-14 down to 10-06. And so that sort of certainly cleaned it up. That was about 4 days, and then it went right into a keg, right into the kegerator. It's been carbonating for about 4 days. So I think that the lager yeast sort of, there's a little bit of a sulfur note to it that actually marries well with the Liberty hops in a way that maybe a subtle ester profile from an ale yeast in the Liberty works, because I've loved that version, but I think this is just a little bit better. I like this just a little bit more. I think it's worked. I think the touch of sulfur with the that Liberty character. There's a zippy herbal spiciness to it that isn't super strong. It's like just enough to keep that corn in check, that corn flavor in check.
True.
I think it balances well.
Which the corn would come out more in an ale version of this recipe.
So when I've used 2 pounds of corn in the past, it's been too corny, right? But this, maybe because of the extra attenuation I got, maybe the overnight mash giving me a highly attenuated wort, highly fermentable wort, I should say, works pretty well. So the one thing about this yeast is that when I transferred it, when I was taking samples out of the brew bucket, it looked like a Hoegaarden. I mean, it was opaque, and I was like, oh man, is this ever gonna? But what I realized as I let it drain, it got clearer and clearer. And then when I looked into the fermenter at the end, you could see that there was a good yeast cake at the bottom, but above the yeast cake, there was some real just what they call just dusty yeast. So once I pulled that through, then I was getting clear beer the rest of the way. So I think in the brew bucket, I'll think next time I use a yeast to just try to get the dip tube. I start with it from it's pointing down, and then when you go to run off, you turn it like a quarter turn to get it sideways. But I think maybe I'll just go a little bit past quarter to see if I can get up above the dusty stuff and have it be more clear. But over the last couple days, it no longer looks like Hoegaarden. So
True.
It's hazy, but it's every day that I've sampled it, it's getting clearer and clearer.
Yeah.
So, and I did hit this with a little gelatin because I was concerned about that. And with this style, I want it to be crystal clear.
How long has it been in the keg?
3.5, 4 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it still has some time.
Yeah.
I would say that, a hallmark of the style is also just brilliant clarity, which you'll get there.
Yep.
That's good. So
I think one last turn of the screw for this, I think in this example, using RO water and doing my minerals from there versus trying to balance. This is still probably a little bit more chloride heavy than I necessarily want it to be. Just to get a little cleaner, crisper finish on it, I think it really would require me to go to RO water and then bring the sulfate chloride ratio closer to 1. I was just afraid I could do that with our water, but then I have to add, like this was almost 4.5 grams of gypsum. In order for me to balance it out, I need to get up to almost 10, 12 grams of gypsum. I was just afraid it would start tasting, for such a delicate thing, chalky. Yeah. And that's not no bueno with this style. So
it's no bueno with a lot of styles,
yeah.
to be honest. So great. I think this is excellent. I want to talk more about the overnight mash because I think that's a technique that people may want to try. So you think the main benefit, of course, you say you dough in and then you just walk away, go to bed.
The main benefit is time savings.
Okay.
Right.
How long? What if there was an emergency the next day?
Yep.
And you couldn't get to it? What would you do then?
I think
how long can you go for it to sit there?
So when I did this, I mashed in. I mashed in at 154, right? I mashed in and achieved a temperature of 154. When I came back the next morning, and the next morning actually meant like 9 a.m. or so, it was then at 130 degrees. So, it's up there and it's over the span of 12 hours. I mean, it's slowly creeping down. How long can you really go? I don't know. This is the only time this has ever happened to me. When I popped it open, the first wave that you get off the top smelled a little trashy, a little bit trash heap, which you have to expect because you've got there's all kinds of stuff on the grain that's sort of taking over, especially once it drops into a certain temperature range. You're hoping that when you start at like 154 or something, that you stunt a lot of that stuff because it's almost hot enough to sort of pasteurize some of those types of bugs, but that's not always the case. If I was doing that in the middle of summertime, it would probably stay in like the 140 range and it would actually probably get really trashy. If you let it go too long, the danger you really have is the lactobacillus taking over and you sour the mash a little bit, which wouldn't be all that bad if that's what you're going for. So the real benefit is a little bit of time savings on the next day. But you can go, I've gone probably close to a full like 24 hours. Because I know I've done it where like on a weeknight I'll dough in at say 8 o'clock at night and then go to work the next day and come back. So I've done overnight mashes before with say 24 hours, but I think you start to push it and you have to use your senses. You got to open it up and you got to smell it and ask yourself, is it still good? This is the only time I've ever had one be questionable, but when I ran some wort out the bottom, it smelled great. And it didn't taste weird. So I figured maybe it was just like the top layer. So I just said, screw it, we'll see what happens. And if I get a weird off flavor, then this video would become off flavors from overnight mashing video. But instead, it's a wonderful victory.
Yeah.
So overnight mashing is great from that standpoint. I don't do it all the time because I feel like I have never done side by sides to see how much control I really have over, the mash profile and the finished beer. But for a style like this where you want attenuation, I think it works great.
Yeah, agreed.
And I was doing 2 beers. So what happened was I boiled 3 gallons of water to a really hard boil and dumped that into the mash tun with that overnight mash and stirred it really well and ran that off. And I basically, it was almost like doing, I guess you wouldn't really call that no sparge, but the volume I got in that run was enough, was what I needed for pre-boil. So I started to boil that while I was heating water for a second mash in one of these, in this. So I was boiling the cream ale while I was doing the Janet's Brown in this. So that's the time savings. You actually, by starting the night before, you know, you can sort of do 2 beers the next day, which is time savings math-wise. It's not time savings time-wise, but it, you know. But when you do an overnight mash, you can break up the brew day. So for like guys like us with a family, you know, you put the kids to bed. I used to do it when the kids were younger. Put them to bed, set up the mash, and then like Saturday morning, get up before anybody's up, and all you have to do is run off, sparge, and boil. And it condenses your brew day into 2 smaller pieces.
Got it.
Sometimes a little more manageable.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a long-winded response.
I appreciate it.
But it's an overnight mash, so we got to go and go.
And you hate the phrase two-row because...
Yeah, because I just told you that this recipe was 5 pounds of 2-row and then 5 pounds of 2-row. They're both 2, it's all 2-row. Everything's 2-row. So from now on, we're just going to say this recipe has 2-row in it, and you're going to go, oh yes, if you want, you know, it's a marketing thing that they just call it 2-row, and like American malts, especially, they call like those pale malts 2-row, American 2-row, and we all know what that means. It means a lightly colored, sort of low characteristic, highly attenuated, highly convertible malt. Right? But it's a little bit, but when I just tell you 2-row, you don't really know what I'm saying. Am I saying, some people mix up like pale malt and pale ale malt. Those are 2 very different things. So we say 2-row. I just would prefer to say pale malt. And don't get me started on saying Munich malt. So Munich malt's even worse, right? Because Munich malt comes in like 4 or 5 different colors depending who you buy it from, right? So anyway.
Things Mike hates.
Yes.
That'll be the next video next week. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel because we do this kind of thing every single week. Hope you learned something. Try overnight mashing. This beer came out well. There wasn't any ill effects. Again, just got to make sure that nothing happens that next day.
Yep.
That you can actually get back to the brew session and make yourself a great beer. For John and Mike, brew-dudes.com. Brew on.
Cheers.